So welcome to our fourth panel discussion in the series titled Perspectives on a Post-COVID-19 Economy. Today's panel discussion will focus on supply chain and operations. We're excited to have Professor Rachel Chen as our moderator tonight. Professor Chen will introduce the panelists, but before I turn the microphone over to her, I'd like to take a moment to review the rules of engagement for this meeting. So number one, you're probably used to hearing this. Please keep your microphones muted throughout. The format you can expect today is about the first hour being Professor Chen leading a discussion with the panelists on some in-depth interview questions around their industry. The last half an hour will be allocated to open Q&A. So if you have questions, please post them in the chat feature and make sure you're posting it to everyone. If your question is directed to a particular panelist, please include their name. If it's to both panelists, please include that as well. We want everyone to be comfortable throughout this session. So if you need to take a break at any time, please do so, and just make sure that you turn your camera off and stay muted, but do not leave the session. Thank you. So let's get started. Professor Chen.
Okay, now it's my turn. Welcome everybody. It's so good to see everyone in this afternoon. And my name is Rachel Chen, and I am a faculty here. I taught supply chain management, I taught operations, and I'm so glad to kind of reunite with my students in this panel discussion. So today we have two great panel speakers today. So Peter has been our MBA student, and he graduated in 2016. Damien and graduated in 2009. So they are great alumni, and they are contributing to the GSM. So Peter has been working in various roles in operations and supply chain management, and right now he is the director of operations in Sonoma brands, and he will talk about some of the challenges they face during this COVID-19. Damien has been working in the wine industry, and right now he is the vice president of the supply chain of the Chichero family estate. I hope I pronounced the name correct. So it's so great to have both of you. Welcome to the panel discussion. Okay, so I haven't seen them after they graduated from GSM, so it's good to see you again. Okay. So we also have the two parts of the meeting. So the first part of the meeting, I will raise a number of questions. So I guess the questions I'm mostly curious about is how has the COVID-19 virus affected your industry so far? How has the virus created particular challenges on your job, either as the manager or the vice president of the supply chain? So I guess you guys probably will answer those questions, take turns, and then whoever wants to go first. And Peter, do you want to go ahead? And how does COVID-19 affect your industry so far? Peter, you are muted.
Okay. There you go. Yeah, I can go first. So, my specialty is startup companies, growth companies, and so COVID has hit the startup CPG companies very hard. And what I mean by that is that in initial stages, demand changed, the consumer behavior changed, and our ability to recognize revenue in different channels has changed. And why that's difficult for startup companies is that we're highly reliant on cash in the beginning stages. And so it's caused a lot of startup companies to focus specifically on cash and their cash position and protecting that at all costs in order to gain the runway, reduce cash burn, to survive this crisis. And so companies that have a poor cash position will have to seek fundraising in a down round. Capital is more costly and it's more scarce. Investors, private equity investors are risk averse at this point in time. and they're looking for great deals and a reduction of their risk. And so what could happen to small and medium companies at this time is that they can't either find funding, or funding is so expensive that they have to give away a large portion of their equity. And so a lot of these growth companies have had to figure out how to reduce cash burn, how to reposition their brands in a more effective way, how to have targeted marketing spends and targeted innovation that actually captures what the consumers are doing. And so it's forced a more refined strategy, and then to wait out this time period until the consumer demand requirements have been solidified. And so that's essentially what has been happening. For us at Sonoma Brands, we've been focusing more on direct-to-consumer. We've seen the consumer brands switch to Instacart for grocery shopping. They have gone to mass stores more readily than grocery, and they've been buying snacks online. They've also been doing a lot of baking. So a lot of the baking sets, marshmallows, dip marshmallows in the baking sets have been selling more so than in the traditional candy sets. So it's been very interesting. And we've figured out the consumer behavior, and we've pivoted quickly, and so we're gaining the rewards of that. So that's a little background, a little context on what we're dealing with.
So you're saying, like, on the consumer side, they are still eating and consuming the products, just like they're buying from different channels, and you have to reallocate your resources so that the food and the product is sold through a different channel now.
Correct. So simply put, consumers are still buying. They're still buying, but how they're buying is different. And so that's the greatest challenge that we're focusing on is, one, providing a product that consumers want to buy in a crisis, and then two, where are they buying their snacks now? They're not buying it at grocery. They're not buying it at C-stores. Where are they buying it? And so, I mean, it's taken, a large amount of humility and also curiosity to figure that out, and then to be nimble enough to pivot as we figured out the consumer behavior in this crisis.
I see. So thank you. So Damien, you have something to share about the wine. I think people are still drinking, probably drink even more. So do you have to redirect the distribution channel?
Yeah, we hope so, and thanks for everyone's support. And I like how Peter kind of set up, sort of the work environment being a startup one, and I think it's really great that you have both of us as panelists, because I think as we get into this, it'll be interesting the types of questions that we get, and to compare and contrast some of our businesses as well as the supply chains that we have. So Trinchero Family Estates is the second largest winery in the United States. It's been around for about 75 years, and about 75 different brands, $1 billion of revenue. We ship around 20 million cases a year. So as Professor Chen had pointed out, my role is to run the supply chain here, and what that entails is supply planning, demand planning, direct and indirect procurement, co-manufacturing, and global customer service and logistics. So, within that scope, this has been a process that sort of emerged over a period of time, and we did start to see some things percolating in our supply base, particularly in Asia. But it was a matter of to what extent we wanted to recognize that something was going on within our business, and then of course we all know what sort of manifested itself at a later point. So specifically for our industry and for our business, from the early days, we were really just trying to get a sense of what the heck was going on. And I was chatting with Peter and Professor Chen just yesterday about it. Is we definitely pointed our supply chain in a direction day one, and we were trying to be very proactive and ramp up our production engine. But We got lucky in some cases, and in other cases, we pointed it completely the wrong direction. But what we knew in an effort to mitigate risk, knowing that we could be shut down, some of the businesses that we depend on could be shut down, is we started to ramp up in order to convert into finished goods. So, you know, our focus was there in lieu of a real signal, and a real signal of the wild demand fluctuations. We'd find out more, you know, as it was history, and then re-aim. But again, in the early days, we're just trying to get people out of the building, get them in a safe place, reset our operations, try to keep our operations going, and keep each one of our colleagues, you know, safe in their new work environment. We also set up a number of contingency plans. I had bad branding in retrospect, but our contingency plan, you know, we called it kind of the designated survivor model. There are current key positions where our business literally, you know, shuts down if you can't take orders or ship product. So we started to sort of segregate some of the personnel in an effort to have sort of contingency plan A, B, and C in the event that we had an event inside of our own organization. And then, you know, of course, immediately went and identified risk across our supply base as well as our customer base, where, you know, some are more critical than others. And so we really determined that quickly, and made sure that we were talking at the right level and at the right frequency within each one of those organizations. In terms of some of the channel activity that we saw going on and has, you know, persisted over this time period, in terms of on-premise, and for some of you that may not be familiar with that term, on-premise, all that really means is you're going to a location to consume our products. So, you know, bars, restaurants, even concerts can be considered to be on-premise occasions. And this channel literally is nosedived and still hasn't really come back. So you can maybe imagine some of the challenges associated with that in terms of obsolescence. And then from a longer term view, just knowing that, you know, look, small businesses go out of business every day, but there's the reality of there were probably some pretty healthy on-premise businesses that are just not going to be there when all the dust settles. So there's going to be a business for our sales staff to really rebuild. So we've got sort of an obsolescence challenge and literally a top line challenge that we have to work through over a period of time, including all of the fine wine that's pent up in that supply chain, because oftentimes in the on-premise environment, you have brands that are specifically targeted for that environment, as opposed to what I'll get to next is the off-premise. So off-premise is sort of the completely different story, because as you know, everyone's going to find a way to drink, and so that mechanism has been through off-premise. And off-premise is really you know, your grocery stores and such, where you go and you know, buy it at the scanner, if you will. And for us, this has been a really big boon, because what I'll say is that it's a large percentage of our business. We have strong brands that people recognize and enjoy in a time of uncertainty. Aside from people trying to, you know, buy economical sizes, they're also looking for some stability, and you know, human nature is to go find something that you're familiar with and is predictable. So we've got brands that kind of fit that bill, and we've seen a significant lift in our off-premise business. And to a large extent in that space, we've been chasing demand quite literally. And you know, we've had our share of challenges. So, you know, you can look at the customer. I remember we got a call from Safeway and said, hey, we know we've got 50,000 cases on order, but yeah, let's put the shipments on hold. And then that night, of course, we see on Channel 7 that the Tracy distribution center has been shut down, and they've got, you know, a big situation going on there. And when these incidents happen, they tend to come like a thief in the night. And from what I could tell, they last a couple weeks before sort of business can resume. Within our own organization, we had some precautionary shutdowns, but we've never really had a big incident. But within our own operations, what we've done in an effort to really respect the fact that a lot of our colleagues are managing a lot of different things. You know, they're being teachers and, you know, just everyone's doing their best. So we instituted a sort of mandate to not do any overtime. Well, from a supply chain professional standpoint, that means that our capacity just went down, and we are going to have trouble finding that pedal to chase demand. So that, in addition to some of our suppliers having their own incidents, it really became an issue as well. So we're still chasing glass containers. That's been really one of our biggest challenges, because a couple of the largest manufacturers in the world have had incidents in plants that we, you know, depend on. So, you know, you can have really great wine sitting in a tank or a barrel, but unless you can put it in a container, it's going to be problematic. So, I mean, it's just an interesting time in that regard. And then I think the other channel that I would just briefly touch on is sort of that e-commerce channel. And, you know, that's got some, I think, some subcomponents to it, because, you know, you can go to literally the winery, you can go through your retailer, or some of these other, you know, platforms like Drizzly and such. But in any event, across the board, we've seen very big lift in that. And so, you know, our industry's been no exception in that regard. And from what I could tell is going on is, you know, I think a lot of us were just sort of on the fence in terms of how we went and procured alcohol. And this event has really been the kick in the tail that a lot of people needed to, I'd say, download that app or find that alternative way to have that delivery mechanism. And, you know, time will tell if they like that as a delivery mechanism. But for all intents and purposes, we've seen, you know, very big lift in that environment.
Okay, thank you. So I'm really curious. So you're saying you're facing some of the challenges by working with the online channels. So I mean, what kind of methods do you do, like logistics wise? And do you send it directly to consumers, or do you still go through some retailers?
It's all the above. I think the internal challenge for the e-commerce component is really just been scaling our operation, because it's grown, you know, I'd say by factor of like 4x. So we want to, you know, maintain sort of our same service level agreement with the customers, especially the incremental ones that just tried us. And so given some of the labor constraints that we put on ourselves, and really it's in an effort to make sure people are safe and to respect each and every colleague for what they may be up against when they leave work, that's been a balancing act. But I think what's been great is, because unfortunately some of our tasting rooms are shut down, we've been able to be creative with how we move labor resources around in an effort to really meet the challenge.
Okay, yeah. So I want to also direct this question to Peter. So for Peter, you also mentioned that you are moving a lot of the distribution channel to online. And what is the biggest challenge you face when you are, you know, you said you redirect your resources, and what is the most difficult part of this, doing this?
I think the most difficult part was to realize the actual shift in consumer behavior. So most of our business was in other channels, you know, basically mass, C-store, or grocery. And we saw a significant bump in Amazon sales and then e-commerce sales on our company platform for Smashmallow. Mm-hmm. And once we saw a change in consumer behavior, we took certain steps to support that as were dealing with the inconsistency of buying patterns from the retail stores. And so what we did is we did a strategic shift in our spending pattern, especially on marketing, to target our direct consumer, focusing more ads on Instagram, Facebook, Google, to support the e-commerce craze, if you call it. Yeah, and we still have that concerted effort. But now, as of the last couple of weeks, we're starting to see more consistency on the retail buying section. So although Amazon is increasing, I mean, we've got a 45% vector on Amazon growth, which is really great. We're noticing mass is growing as well, so we're supporting that with marketing spends. Grocery is now starting to come along, and that's a good sign for confidence in the market. Resets. So if anybody doesn't know what a reset is when there are opportunities every year to gain access and position on shelves in certain retailers like Kroger, Fred Meyer's, Harris Teeter's, you name it, Raley's, and the store will essentially reset their programming and reset their shelf space and allow new entrants with the potential to provide profitability to that grocery store to gain placement. During the initial stages of the COVID crisis, most, if not all, retailers placed a pause or a moratorium on resets. So if you had planned growth and planned spend on either innovation or increase in production to support it, you had to place that on hold, scrap your plan, and start over. And now we're seeing a resurgence in that, which is great for the economy, great for the consumer, and then obviously great for Smashmouth.
I see. Great. Thank you. So I have another question is that like you talk so far more about the distribution side, like you recognize consumers still eating and drinking. So actually, I think by doing this quarantine, people are eating and drinking more. And I ask my students, do they do more with grocery shopping or less? They say they do more because everyone is staying at home and everyone is eating. So seems like business is good. You just need to reposition how you send the product to the consumers. Then I'm very curious about the supply side. Like say, do you see a lot of disruption from the supply side? Like do you have a good collaboration with your suppliers? And do you feel like there is a risk that in the supply chain for like not getting the food or delivery or whatever supply material from your suppliers? So I'll start with Peter.
So far we have had no risk to our supply chain. We get weekly reports on the risk assessment. They either highlight whether they've had cases at the plant or not at all. They assess the risk of the government risk, the manufacturing risk, you name it, multiple categories. And every week they provide an assessment on where they stand. And so far, all of our manufacturers, they're very professional, best in class, SQF and BRC qualified, with the highest food safety standards. They have all been operational. And another interesting fact about our supply chain is that all of our logistic nodes have been fully operational. And that's a great credit to all the logistics companies out there and the truckers who move our product, that they're still able to feed America during one of the most devastating crises that we've seen in the last decade.
Great. So how about you? How about the wine suppliers, Damien?
Yeah, as I said, I mean, it's been challenging at times, but I think, to Peter's point, we've been really fortunate to the extent that people have really been able to keep things together. And like I mentioned earlier, out of Asia, we were starting to see some risk percolate, and a lot of that had to do with the timing of deliveries coming out of there. And in that case, it was really driven by some point of sale sort of media that was coming out of there, and eventually we delivered to stores for the resets and promotions that Peter was speaking to earlier. And then a little bit later on, we started to see goods really slow down out of Europe. So that's both dry goods as well as some of the international wineries that we help distribute product for. And throughout this global pandemic, I would say it's been amazing just how global logistics largely has stayed intact. So in spite of all the shutdowns and these things, goods have continued to move. It's just at a slightly slower pace. So, as a supply chain professional, what you start doing is you stock up and you start, working the buffer or suffer sort of angle. And so that was something that we recognized early on, and why I would say, as I mentioned, before we even knew which way to run, we just knew that we were probably on the clock, and we wanted to ramp up our production engine because we literally didn't know what the next day or the next week might look like. One thing I was reflecting on as we started talking about this call is what's been interesting for me is I think the fire season the last several years has helped us prepare in some strange way for sudden changes and having to adapt. So this is similar, just different. And I think what's been different is we kind of saw this one coming, where the fires just suddenly happened. And I think our supply chain and the professionals that I'm charged with leading, they just really got into almost fire season mode and really stepped up and started to reach out to our supply base and customer base. So, I shared some of the challenges along the way, but what was interesting is we started looking at, I'd say there's, 30 main suppliers that could just take us down any moment, but, full scope, there's probably over 100 to 150 different suppliers we directly reached out to when things really started to happen. So we just kind of divided and conquered. But what I found to be most interesting is we had a couple of suppliers literally preparing to shut down. So we had a capsule supplier, and we're single-threaded with that one, or put it in supply chain terms, so we're sole sourced with them. So that means we're highly dependent on them. And so they said, yeah, we're shutting down on this day. And so we literally had to start sending them information from the government. We sent them notifications on company letterhead saying, we're an essential business, and by extension of that, you need to stay open. And so there were just some interesting times throughout. So I don't want to act like it's sort of like a soap opera and things change every day, but it's been truly challenging and rewarding at the same time, because the team's got to really come together, and you start to understand the strength in your relationships with suppliers and customers, because some of the systems stuff we do and the administrative things like POs and contracts, that's all great, but if you can't pick up the phone and call someone that can mobilize their organization, then you might be missing an opportunity.
This is a fantastic view. I really like it, because the relationship people build with their suppliers and their clients are very, very valuable. So sometimes we cannot really count on, those hard contracts. Oh, you say, oh, this is written on a piece of paper, you are supposed to go this. a lot of times it's based on the relationship, the trust people have built on, and over the time, and then that really works in this in challenging time. And a very, very interesting thing you talk about is that now the supply chain is more prepared because of the fire season we had for the past few years. So it seems like the supply chain is now more resistant to risks, and a lot of the random events happened to affect the supply chain. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I would just add that, you know, in reality, and I don't want to downplay some of the administrative things we do as professionals, particularly in the procurement space, but, you know, there's these two magic words you see more and more these days is force majeure. And, you know, at that point, all bets are off, and you're having to really focus on relationships and the ability to influence people within another organization that you're interdependent with to move in a direction.
Yeah, that's very nice to share. Okay, so I have another question I have is like, oftentimes I had students who are like currently MBA students, they ask me that they are interested in going into you know, the supply chain or operations, and they are interested to know what kind of like analytical or management skills like you guys are looking for. Suppose that I mean, you guys are right now at the management position, and then you look at the future like interviews or whatever. What kind of tools they or skills that you think it's vital for them to, you know, develop themselves the career in supply chain management? So I'll start with Peter again.
Okay, yeah. So when I look at candidates or I hire people, I have a different philosophy than most. I'm looking for attitude. I'm looking for fit of culture, and so, you know, attitude is tough to learn, right? Skills you can train, and you can train them well, or train them to the company and the philosophy of the company. Attitude is very, very important. You know, you need to be a team player. You need to understand concepts like ownership. What do I mean by ownership? You know, can you take charge of a project or a task and be responsible for the success or failure of that task? If that's a yes, then we want you. Perseverance. We're in a startup environment. If you don't know how to fail, and failing's common in the entrepreneurship world, entrepreneurship is more glamorized. You see a lot of the successes, but what you don't see is the grit and determination it takes to win. And what we need are people who can fail, get up, change course, and then move with a passion in a new direction. If you have those skills, then we want you. You need to be dependent. And what I mean by that is simply do what you say you're going to do it well, and then do it on time. And we have a philosophy here that the market does not wait. The market does not care if you show up late with a inferior product. At bottom line, it won't sell or it won't work. And so you need to be dependent. Last one is humility. And what I mean by that, and I may be stealing a quote from somebody else, but it's the self-knowing that one simply doesn't know. And what I mean by that, and you can say it in a different way, is just having the courage to be curious, constantly asking questions. Is my strategy right? Is my tactic right? Or is my method right? And constantly reassessing. And that's set us up for success in this COVID crisis. You know, we could have, an example of that, we could have just continued to focus on grocery and mass and C-stores and completely miss the buying behavior change to online. And that curiosity set us up to quickly change and take advantage of that. As for hard skills, I mean, we're looking for 3 to 5 years of experience in a known startup or strategic CPG brand, either, you know, managing manufacturing plants, running logistics, or if you're in the R&D, quality assurance space, MS and food science, and experience in that. And then we also love quants. We love quant savvy individuals and who can think independently. And so that's what I'm looking for in a candidate.
Great. That's very good to hear. So it sounds like some students ask me, like, if they don't have any working experience in operations management, they want to switch career into this. You think that is okay, as long as they are willing to learn, they can learn quickly, right? I assume that is the answer.
Correct. Great attitude, willing to learn, and willing to put in the hard work it takes to succeed in a startup.
Okay, very glad to hear. Okay, Damien, I want to switch over to see what do you think. Any thoughts about what you're looking for?
Hey, I got to say ditto on a lot of the stuff Peter mentioned. One thing that sort of resonated with me is there's this thing out there, and if you guys haven't seen it, it's just called the accountability ladder. But I keep it in front of my team a lot, and I got to say that when I'm looking for candidates, I look for a lot of the characteristics that Peter just mentioned, because it's all about, do things happen to you or do you make things happen? And so when you have high accountability, you have characteristics where you're willing to do the work, you've got the grit and the ownership level, as Peter pointed out, in terms of sort of, and you can't train that, is my view. So I would agree with Peter. I'm looking for certain characteristics straight out in any candidate for just about any position. But I'd say in general, what I look for in supply chain candidates is people that I could project doing more. So I could see them, being promoted into a couple different roles, or even working, laterally across the organization in different roles. And I like to see in their professional experience or some of the attributes that they're willing to see the big picture and think about things as sort of a bigger, ecosystem. They're more concerned with how things work together than just, sort of their department or just, not someone that necessarily is narrow in thinking. So project management skills, cross-functional track record, and ability to, give examples on that, I think are critically important. A little bit more supply chain related, I'd say. I'd like to see candidates that, run to the customer. So it's all about how do you deliver value to the customer in supply chain. So they don't necessarily need to have, direct customer management in their past, but there has to be something about them that is customer centric, because the reason why we do all this stuff is to, at the end of the day, deliver something that the consumer wants or our direct customer wants. And if that doesn't click, then that's a red flag from my perspective anyway. And I'd say lastly, and I think this is going to become more and more important, is sort of that strategic mindset. So, gone are the days, at least I hope, where we're just buying stuff. I think now we're getting to a point where is to say, okay, what's the competitive landscape within this category? And sure, we're in the wine business, but we need to know a heck of a lot about glass or some of the other things that our business is dependent on. And then you start to kind of determine, how do we want to go about that? What's important to us? Is price important to us, or is it really low risk level and we're willing to pay more? So, that's a lot to unpack there, because there's a number of attributes, but it's unpacking those, articulating them, looking at the landscape in the humility, as Peter pointed out, to go back inside of the organization and walk stakeholders through, kind of what you're seeing and what you're recommending, so that you can take that and what you own and deliver on it. So those are some of the things that I would add, but I thought Peter had a really spot on sort of response to your question.
Yes, yes. I mean, both of you guys have contributed very well. I mean, I now I have very good answers to the students about this, and they don't have to worry about their background. And what's more important is about the attitude and willingness to learn and be responsible, take the initiative. I guess those are the most important factors for success. So looking forward, I mean, when we look at, I mean, hopefully this, we will have the vaccine developed within a year. And what do you look at the future? Do you feel like there will be significant changes after the COVID-19? Do we move more on the line? Or do we move more everything online? Do we have more like a digitization of like even selling to consumers or dealing with clients, dealing with suppliers? Do you expect something like that? So I'll go with Damien this time first. Yeah,
so you were a little bit underwater when you were asking the question, but I think you were touching on, you know, how are things going to change as we get out of this crisis? Yeah. That's a great question. I think, of course, you know, the digitization thing is going to continue. And as I said, I think there's been some things that have really motivated consumers to move in that direction. I got to tell you, from sort of a supply chain standpoint, particularly on the planning and sourcing and making components of supply chain, we've really noticed that our systems are just not sufficient. So we knew that going into the event, and it was a barrier, but it really became a challenge to where we had this dynamic thing, a fluid situation, and as variables changed, you know, at times we go, oh my gosh, this part of our system doesn't allow us to, you know, take a demand expectation and convert it into an integrated supply plan across multiple entities. How do we do trade-offs when it takes 3 days to work through all the Excel spreadsheets to determine what they even are? So I think systems are going to be critically important for anyone with a supply chain, and I could say that you know, that's definitely something that we have to work on and drastically improve inside of our organization. I think you know, maybe this isn't appropriate for after the COVID-19, but what I would say and what I hope is a condition that persists is to get away from some of the fluff that we were doing before. So I'd say that, you know, it's really forced the issue for my leadership team to work more closely with one another and understand each other's jobs and how they do need each other. But I've also seen relationships with other departments drastically change. So, you know, I would say that supply chain's relationship with sales has drastically improved. And, you know, we would be in a lot of different cross-functional meetings pre-COVID, and, you know, you've got all the different forms and the different strategies. And when a lot of this hit, it literally just turned into, hey, I got to talk to the head of sales every day just so we can compare notes and be aligned, and then we'll go do whatever that is. And I like that. I don't know that it's, you know, going to be the right way to build a strategy, but I think coming out of the COVID crisis, we have to find a way to sort of not kind of sink back into our old methods of running the corporation and you know, governing our strategy. So I'm hoping for a rebalance in that regard.
So you see more like integrated within the company. Like I remember usually when I teach operations to students, I say, like, you know, operations people usually hate marketing people. because the marketing people keep promising and operations people say, I can't deliver because we have finite capacity. So there will be a conflict between those two types of roles. And you are saying like now they are communicating with each other more, they are more integrated. So it's more a smooth collaboration kind of within the company. And you hope this will continue even after COVID-19.
Yeah, and look, you know, we've had to test the system at times where, so it's all great, but we've actually had to pressure test it at times where, you know, the conversation prior to COVID-19 was, is this, you know, what length should this capsule be? What are the 10 different shades of red, and how does it look in the lighting of a, you know, grocery environment? Let's do a study on that. To really just getting to the point of, hey, can you sell this without capsules, or can you just be happy to have capsules? And you have the person that's selling the product going, yep, I'll take one of those. Let's move on to the next challenge. So I just think that there's some rebalancing there and some calibration that's occurred, you know, across probably most entities, and I think there's got to be a concerted effort to sort of continue to ride that wave, the good parts of it, and to readjust.
So it sounds like the risk or the challenges actually bring people closer to each other, and then create some type of bonding among the different function departments, and then that actually will bring more benefits to the organization. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, that's very good to know. So that's why I always make my exam hard. So all the MBA students will create that very long-lasting bonding. They remember that they suffer together. So yeah. Peter, so do you want to comment on like how do you think you know, the things will be different after COVID-19, especially like digitization of the economy after COVID-19?
Yeah, I mean, so we look at it two ways. I mean, obviously consumer behavior is huge for us. And so we look at consumer behavior, and the big question is will that change again? How entrenched are the consumers in their methods right now versus in a year, 6 months, year? And try to predict whether or not they're going to be entrenched online, or they're going to reduce their online presence and move back into the grocery store, or do a hybrid of the two. So that's a big question that needs to be answered. You know, and with analyzing more data over time, we'll finally understand whether they're going to be entrenched online or do a blend of both. I don't think it's going to move back to the way it was. I think there's going to be some sort of online presence in a big way in the future. Now, strategy changes as well. So when you're in the middle of a crisis, you have to reassess fundamentally your strategy. If you keep the same strategy in a time of crisis, you'll probably fail. And so we had to take a hard look at what was our end state during this crisis. What did success look like? And for us, we determined that, you know, it may not be about growth right now. It may be about cash preservation. So when you switch strategies like that, then you can implement tactics that make sense. A tactic on growth doesn't necessarily work on tactic on cash preservation. And so then you have to re-identify tactics and measurable goals that you're trying to meet to support that strategy. And so it's essentially a complete overhaul when you're in a crisis. And so some of the stuff that Damien was alluding to on how teams work and what's working and what's not has to be completely re-understood, redefined, and practiced well. You know, we looked at everything from, you know, SKU rationalization, you know, reduction in inventory levels, optimization, targeted marketing spend, targeted innovation. You know, how do we sell? How do we get our product to consumers? All that had to be re-evaluated on whether or not it would be successful. And once we get a better understanding of how consumers behave in the next 6 months, we will reshift our strategy to growth. And then that will then again move tactics support that strategy. And so it's a pretty interesting times. And I have to reiterate this: the companies that do not do this are the companies that will not make it. And so, yeah, you have to have the humility to understand that, or at least ask the question.
So do you think this is has something more to do with the product, or the category your company belongs to, because you are working in like startups, and then you have to reposition or adjust to the environment quickly all the time, re-examine your strategy all the time? So,
so startups are nimble enough to do that, and the strategy we're taking is not necessarily as dramatic as I'm posing it. It's just a concentrated shift on the method you're using to get an end result, right? And so, yeah, and again, so where you're spending your money, how lean is your team, how are they integrating? Can they be successful in a growth mindset in the future? So that all these questions were asked, we answered them in our way, and we developed tactics to support it. And I believe we'll be in a better foundation coming out of this than other companies will be. If that makes sense.
Okay, so it seems like you are fully aware of the impact. So do you have a sense of, when you look at the strategy of your company, do you have a sense of how your competitors are doing? Have you heard stories about the competitors that are facing very significant challenges during this COVID-19?
So let me be clear. A lot of CPG startup companies are in a very bad position right now.
Oh, okay.
So so there are numerous companies that are in a poor cash position that have to raise in a down valuation. And please ask questions about that if people don't understand what I'm talking about. But you're forced to take on cash in not ideal situations. Now there's a greener pasture at the end of this, right? Mm-hmm. So as companies start to fail or have to engage in M&As or gain funding in a down valuation, that creates limited options on the upside. So when you're looking, if you're a strategic company like Pepsi, Mars, Mondelez, Hershey, you name it, there are going to be fewer options for growth potential in 2021. And then they will have to reach down and pick up companies at a more not mature, so what I mean by that, they're going to have to reach down to companies that are 100 million and less and pay more for that than traditional multiples because there are more limited options and competitions are scarce, and there are going to be few premium brands for them to buy and for a potential growth vector on their end, if that makes sense. So the M&A market, the funding market has completely and utterly changed due to the COVID crisis. Right now, there's down valuations, but in 2021, the scarcity of growth acquisitions is going to cause a overvaluation in 2021. That makes sense.
Yeah, that's very good to know. Thank you so much for this insight. So Damien, what do you think? You think your competitors? How do they survive? Do you have a sense like how your competitors are surviving in this pandemic?
Yes.
and everyone's suffering.
Yeah, I don't know how much I have to share, but I think that they're going through a lot of the same challenges within their own organization. And I think that as you look at the different channels in which some winery competitors, sell in, it's sort of starts to shape the story. So as an example, a company that maybe looks like ours would have similar challenges, but maybe a company that looks like ours in size has a larger percentage of their business on premise, as an example. Well, that has sort of a different impact to, you know, the ripple effect within their supply chain and their ability to sort of balance out revenue and contribution. You know, similarly, just across the alcohol space, you know, a lot of spirits, they're really consumed on premise. So a lot of the spirits kind of stream to bars and whatnot. So distributors, you know, are sitting on a tremendous amount of high value inventory, and the suppliers are as well. And some of the accounts that may or may not be in business when this all ends, you know, so a spirits company has slightly different challenges. You know, some of you guys may have seen in the news some of the challenges that the beer guys are having. So there's a tremendous amount of kegs out there that are becoming obsolete, and so, you know, that's a problem. That liquid is, you know, pun intended, going to have to be liquidated. So in the wine industry, there are such thing as wine kegs, but even the really big players, it's a fairly limited amount of keg exposure, I would imagine. But yeah, in terms of, you know, talking in depth around some of our specific competitors, not really prepared to do that this evening, but I would say that based off of my basic understanding, they're experiencing a lot of the same challenges when it comes to planning, sourcing, and making and delivering to customers.
So it sounds to me like it seems like a crisis is a crisis, but a crisis can also be an opportunity for some of the companies. I mean, it could be a disaster or really disruptive for some business, but could also be an opportunity that some business can actually quickly grow and expand during this challenge time. Those people who are more prepared or who are reacting faster, and they are able to take an advantage of this challenging time, actually.
Absolutely correct.
Oh, that's so interesting to know. Wow. I'm very glad to hear that. So now we're close to 6 o'clock. I think we should open up for questions from audience. And as Asia mentioned earlier, so the questions, it's better to submit it to the chat window. And when you submit your chat window, please make sure you send it to everyone. Otherwise, I cannot see it because I am not a host. So send it to everyone. And if you want Peter or Damien to answer those questions, please, you know, put their names before the questions. So I guess that's, Aisha, is that right, the format? Okay, yeah, so we're open up for questions, and then students are welcome to ask.
Peter and I can ask each other questions.
Yeah. So one question I have is, I mean, my students always ask me, is that the career path. So if you look back, what makes you get into this supply chain industry, and how did you see yourself grow over time to collect some of the, you know, experience or components so that you get to the management position? That's something I'm curious about, because for students who are interested in operations or supply chain management, they want to know how do they plan their career ahead of time. So I like to start with Damien. So over the time, how did you get into operations? How did you become, I mean, when you graduated from GSM, did you already make up your mind to become a, you know, in supply chain industry?
Yeah, I think I was really starting to get there at that time, but honestly, I'm probably the worst example. I don't know how the heck I ended up in supply chain. So what I'd say is just hearkening back to even my undergraduate years, which I also went to Davis for that too, and studied agriculture and managerial economics, but never set out to work in supply chain. I would say that I grew up in operations, And what I mean by that is I grew up on a dairy and beef cattle ranch, and I learned how operations worked at a very young age. And then as I got out of my undergrad and went on to my first professional job, I really went into an accounting and finance area, and working for Del Monte Foods. And I think my interest at that time was really just to understand how, the guts of a business work. And sort of looking back on it, I think what I liked about it is finance helped me to work across the entity. And then stepping back further to the study of managerial economics. So for those of you that are that are familiar with it, it's really a study of solving complex problems and methods in which you drive decision making to optimize the firm. So in many ways, there are a number of just supply chain type of attributes that connect for there. I didn't know it at the time, but looking back on it and having a genuine interest in that study, I think that managerial economics was helping me to see across an organization, and then finance was helping me at a very early stage in my career navigate across an organization. And what's been great about what I found about supply chain as I got further into my career is not only could I impact the dollars moving around, but I was able to better connect that to units and relationships and contracts and data as you work across your own organization, but also delivering value to customers as well as suppliers. So I would say I ended up in supply chain by accident, but what sort of held true for me is I like to look across a business and look at it from a fairly high level. And the supply chain perspective was a really big enabler for me to I guess live that passion and make it a reality for how I might contribute to any business. So I don't know if that was helpful or not, but that's how I ended up in supply chain. And I think again, what held true is delivering value, especially if it is agriculture related, and a fascination with things being converted into something else that consumers will buy. So supply chain scratched that itch for me, and super passionate about it.
Definitely, that's exactly what I teach students on the first day. So when I say operations, you basically convert input into output, you deliver value to customers. So it sounds like we're in the same industry. So Peter, I feel like you are more on the strategy level. So do you characterize yourself on operations and supply chain?
Yeah, I've had an interesting background, to say the least. But I was a fellow undergrad Aggie, just like Damien. And then I joined the Marine Corps, and I became a Marine Corps officer.
Whoa.
Went to Navy Marine Corps Jet Aviation Flight School. So flew jets for a while, became a mission commander, actually ran missions in the jet. Was also director of operations equivalent for a 240 Marine 7-jet squadron with 500 million assets. So I helped CEO and the COO run the company. And then I also did a parlay in the infantry world, and I was a joint terminal air controller. If anybody doesn't know what that is, just look it up. Essentially control CAS, close air support aviation assets above you, and support the infantry battalion that you're attached to. So I've had a different operations perspective. It's highly dynamic.
Yeah. We are with military people all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Uncertain environments. And then my wife and I decided that it was time to do something else, and I went back to Davis for the MBA, and they have a special yellow ribbon program where if the MGI bill doesn't cover it, then the university will cover the rest. And so that was a huge incentive for me to go to Davis. I learned a lot. You know, I took your course, so. But yeah, so how did I get into operations? Well, I was already in operations in the military, and so that translates to companies as well. But I did start out at Wells Fargo for my MBA summer associate. I helped senior bankers underwrite food and beverage companies, and then I immediately followed on to an innovation project with the GSM for Mars Foods. And I came more ingrained into the food and beverage industry. And then I happened to run into a serial entrepreneur named John Sebastiani right after he sold Crave to Hershey for $250 million. And he simply asked the question, you know, hey, do you want to be a part of this? Sonoma Brands. I don't know if anybody doesn't know what Sonoma Brands is. It's a private equity firm which invests in emerging brands and also helps advise companies. And so we didn't even have an office. We just had a brand, Sonoma Brands, and I was the third employee hired on that company. And now we started Smashmallow, which is a hit, and we have invested in companies like Vianza Winery. We bought back Crave Jerky. Has anybody heard of Christina Tossi and Milk Bar? We're a huge investor in that. Gayake Yerba Mate. Has anybody seen the yellow can at the C-stores? We invest in that. Hue Chocolate, which is a vegan chocolate company. True Botanicals, which is a non-toxic skincare company. Dang Foods, which is a organic rice chip company. And that's just to name a few. So we're all over the place. We're on our third fund, and we're close to closing our third fund for $120 million. So it's been a wild ride, and throughout the process, I started out on the investment side. I did the due diligence on Dang Foods, our first portfolio investment. But as the company grew, if anybody's ever been part of a startup, you start to get pulled into different directions. And so I had a knack for operations, and I continually got pulled into the operations part of our businesses to the point where now I'm head of ops at Smashmallow. So we've come a long way. We still got a long way to go, but we continue to grow every day.
Great. Sounds like both of you kind of know several aspects of the business, and then it's not like you specialize in supply chain operations. You pretty much know multiple aspects, and then you're just right now in this position of managing operations. Operations is part of what you are managing right now, I feel.
Correct.
Right. You also you need to know how to motivate people, how to do finance, all of those kind of things. So we have several questions actually coming in, and then we want to follow the rule of first come, first serve. Basically, whoever type faster gets their question answered first. So the first question says, for wine industry, how are strategies being adjusted to make up for the tanking of the on-premise demand? Assuming the demand will take some time to come back to pre-COVID-19 levels, how do you divert those resources to other channels? Does it include rebranding? So that, I guess that's for Damien.
Yes, I think good questions, and I would say yes, you do have to reallocate resources in an effort to push those resources to areas that are willing to have conversations about sales opportunities. So, I think that the on-premise channel is starting to slowly open back up, but yeah, there was literally a 60-day period where if your sole focus was on-premise, you don't necessarily have much to do. So I'd say in the early days, we were trying to get a read on it. and we focused on training and the team really being on the same page and poised for when things open back up. But eventually, in many areas, similar to what I had mentioned with the tasting room, we started to redeploy resources in an effort to, double down in areas that we were seeing, lively growth in the business.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like you quickly readjust your resources to the changes.
Yeah, and to address the rebranding, I don't know that we're really there yet. So in my opinion, we've not sort of taken a rebranding position, although we've tried to proactively identify some of our brands that could be a fit for some of the emerging channels that were mentioned in our conversation earlier.
I see. Thank you. So I hope that addressed the question. So Rajat has a question to both of you. Do you think there are any specific technical skills or programming languages or anything else that can helpful for an MBA graduate to have if you target to pursue a career in operations supply chain? So I think he's asking for, do you look for specific, technical data analysis? For example, like big data is very popular nowadays. Do you feel big data or any Python kind of programming language will be very, very important for MBAs to be pursue a career in operations? So I'll go with Peter on this one. You need to unmute yourself, Peter. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, those programs are helpful, but they're not necessary to gain access to a job. And every company has different methods of analyzing data. The key points in the trait that we're looking for is, can you find meaning in that data? Can you find patterns that will help the company make better decisions? Whether it be analyzing where to throw a 3PL or distribution center, depending on your inbound, your outbound, your demand, or where you're shipping your materials, to optimization of the plant, to optimization of the ordering process. You name it. We use data and we analyze it in different ways. And if you're able to do that successfully and gain insights that other people don't have, you'll be a step up. And one of the biggest points I want to make to that is a lesson in life, is that if you just have an opinion that's not supported by data, then it's just an opinion. So for all those MBA students out there, just understand when you come to the company, you have to back up your opinions or your strategy with data, or no one's going to listen to you. They might, but.
Okay, Damien, what do you think? If someone comes to you with an opinion without data, what do you think?
Well, I think I agree with Peter, but I would say that there are times where you may not even have time for data, and you may have to make a decision and at a later point have the data and figure out how sound that decision was. So, for sure, I think any time that you can buy time and be deliberate, that's the way to go, and it does take discipline. But to get back to the question here, yeah, I feel like I'm not qualified to answer the question because I don't know anything about programming languages. But what I would say here is between Peter and I, what we've described and what we've experienced is pretty diverse backgrounds, and so we've each done a bunch of different things. We've been willing to move laterally, through our career, and there's been an intellectual curiosity there. So, hey, look, if you know a programming language, data, to Peter's point, is going to continue to be critically important to any organization. What I would say is don't be married to whatever language that is or approach it is, but what you can bring to the party, aside from those very specific, language skills, is what do you do with the data? And then also just having the skill of being able to structure it, because big data is really not big data unless you have the right infrastructure and hierarchy behind it. So just knowing sort of how to build that properly and scale it across the entity and across potentially multiple entities, that's a skill that employers are going to be interested in. So bring that and bring all of your other experiences. But I would say that I'm looking for diversity in experiences and skill sets, and that's an interesting one. So keep going that direction.
Yeah,
Sounds to me that, yeah, Peter, go ahead.
No, I said it's absolutely right, Damien. Well said.
Yeah, we are reached very good agreement here. So it seems like everyone. I think the key here is that we need to make sense out of the data. I mean, having data itself is not very helpful. So it needs to connect the dots, and eventually there is a message out of the data. Otherwise, the data is just the data. It's like raw material, right? So, so I guess that's the answer. I hope, Rajat, that answer is good for you. The next question actually is a question for Peter. So Ayumi was asking, you had mentioned that you are looking for a candidate who is strong in analytics. Would you mind elaborating on what that means and how a candidate would demonstrate that? So that's like, Peter, I mean, did you mention like you want to, for employees, you are looking at them very strong in analytics?
Yeah, very, very, very strong in analytics. Obviously, they have to be able to do a lot of things, as Damien was mentioning, not just crunch data. But if you're able to understand the data, find trends, connect the dots, like you were saying, and then present it in a way that people can understand, and then form a basis of a decision that can move the company forward, then you are extremely valuable. Extremely valuable. And if you add on top of that the attitude part that I was talking about, I mean, you have the potential of becoming, a senior leader in an organization.
Okay, so
that answers the question.
Yeah, Damien, you have any comment about, like, do you prefer someone have very strong analytics to bring something? I guess it's like ability to see something we're not able to see before. If someone who is very strong with analytics, they can see something more through the data, and that can bring better decisions for the organization. That's very that will be very well received, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Peter said it best, and I would just add that knowing your why is really important, because what can be frustrating from my perspective at times is you have an individual that is very talented when it comes to data analytics and manipulation and all that, but the skill of delivering the goods and understanding why you're doing the analysis in the first place, it's critical. And I think that's kind of what Peter's also touching on, is if you understand what the end game is, and you're able to walk other senior leaders and stakeholders over that bridge, that's a huge value add. So it's not enough to just know how to manipulate data and do cool analytics. That's simply just not going to hit the mark. You have to understand why am I doing this, and what decision am I trying to help the organization make.
Thank you. Yeah, basically there will be some implications from the data analyzed. So there's another question for Peter. So someone asked, saying, you mentioned that being in a full cash position will be detrimental for companies in 2021. Why do you think this, and can you explain this in more detail? Is it that the company will lose value even though they have the same amount of cash? What is the strategy for overcoming this in your mind? So this is related to
let me clarify that point. So in 2020, right now, in this condition, if you are running out of cash and you need to fundraise, this is probably the worst time in the last decade to raise money. And the conditions are scarce for the private equity firms that will lend money. Banks won't lend money in this time because it's too risky, especially for a startup company that is finding its way on a 3-year path to positive EBITDA. The private equity firms, to invest in this time frame, need to exact a concession that is worth the risk that they're undertaking. Private equity investments is risky already, but right now is even riskier time. So you'll see a large portion of private equity firms pull back from the risk and only invest if it's a superior deal under inferior circumstances. And so what that means is either you get less money for more equity, or you can't fundraise, you can't find somebody to invest in you. So you have to have a proposition that makes sense, that's less risky, and that's very hard to do if you're in a cash poor scenario in 2020. Now, 2021, when the economy shown significant rebound and better patterns, then there'll be a completely different fundraising scenario. So startup companies, small companies, medium-sized companies who are growth companies need to make it to 2021.
So it sounds like it's because of the general economic environment that the PEs are very, very cautious with. Venture capitals are very, very cautious with their money. So that's why cash will be quite important. It's because of the category your business is in, because Sonoma brand is more in the PE and the venture capital category, right? Thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So here's another question. So and Alicia asked you if you can go back to your time at a GSM. Are there any classes you wish you could have taken or wish you could have offered? They could have offered that would make you more prepared for your career. So, so you need to recall the days that you spent in GSM. Is there any classes that you regret not taking? Or you hope that like we offered some classes at that time that could help you prepare you better?
I mean, I would have took Professor Chen's class twice if I could have. No, just you know, look, I think it's different for everyone, right? Because you come to the GSM and we all have the experiences that we've had up to that point. So I think if I could go back in time and had this time machine all of a sudden, I would spend. I doubled down on the time that I spent with professors and students, sort of the peer group, because I think, man, it's just a great opportunity to learn from one another. And I would also suggest, and I think I took this path, but I feel good about the fact that I did, is I didn't always take classes that I was super interested in or I thought might be easy for me. So I like math, so business writing makes me dry heave, yet I took the class at the Graduate School of Management because I knew that it would make me a better professional at the end of the day. And so really discipline yourself to take those classes that you kind of don't want to take and you're not super familiar with maybe some of those areas. So, if you're not in marketing and don't ever want to be in marketing, take the class and maybe it'll shift your mindset. One class that I would say had a really big impact on me because it kind of completed the business cycle was Robert Yetman's tax class. You've heard Peter talk about finance here a lot today and how really investors look at things and how shareholder value is perceived. Well, the business cycle, if you don't take taxes into account in terms of how you evaluate companies or how the deal gets done, that's a big miss because it's significant. So not only knowing those financial reports, knowing the fundamentals around accounting and finance, but understanding the tax cycle for everyday business as well as deal making, critically important.
Yeah, I agree. At the MBA, I believe definition of success at the MBA is to have a panoply of experiences, right? Gain as much experience about business and all different segments of the company, so you can become a better manager. You know what to expect out of a marketer, or you know what you don't know to hire somebody that your skill set needs to be offset by. I know I work very closely with VP of marketing, VP of sales, CFO, CEO, so you have to be able to understand each other. If you're able to communicate and try to get solve problems, you have to understand how their perspective, how they're coming from, and how they're viewing problems. And so the MBA allows you to do that. So if you're just going to focus in finance or ops, I recommend taking marketing classes. I wish the GSM had a sales class. That's the one thing that I would be deficient on is the art of the sale or strategy behind selling your product to companies. What are the best methods to do so? So that's a point. I just want to put one shout out. The negotiation class by
Jim Olson?
Yeah, Olson. That is one of the best class, besides your class, Professor Chen.
Thank you. Both so polite.
The best classes I've taken at the GSM, and the reason why I say that is because it was so practical. And I just want all the students here to understand, when you go into your businesses and you start to become senior leaders, you have to be prepared. I mean, every time you pick up a phone call, it's sort of a negotiation. It's fact finding, figuring out what the other company's position is, whether it's your partner, whether you have to do force majeure or whatever it is. It's fact finding and trying to find the alignment of interest and put yourself in the best position possible. And if you're not prepared and you pick up a phone call with a potential supplier and you don't know what your target price is, et cetera. I'm just giving you an example. You are doing your company a disservice. So you need to be prepared. You need to try to predict their position, what their BATNA is, what your position, what your BATNA is, and try to predict a outcome before you even pick up the phone, or you'll waste tons of your investors' money. And so I highly recommend taking that class.
So thank you so much. It's unfortunate we are at 6:30. So I heard from you that the fantastic classes that you have taken. So we received several messages from students and our colleagues saying thank you both of you so much for spending your time with us. I know you guys are fighting with COVID-19 and probably with some of the recent challenges due to like curfew, whatever, and you are generous with your time. And you are generous with your insights. You share everything you have with us. So we are very, very grateful. So thank you so much for coming back. And we should have this more often. I feel like, it's so great to see alumni coming back and contribute to GSM and see each other again and reflect on the experience you have, with the faculty and also the classmates here. Yeah.